Animation is about crafting believable motion. And although Maya is a very complicated software, the tools we use to create motion are actually pretty simple. So far we've learned most of them. The first is the shortcut key S, which is going to allow us to set a keyframe. So if I select an object and I hit S, I've set a keyframe. Now let's talk about this. What this keyframe means is that I've told Maya on frame 1, I want my cone to always be at the location, rotation, scale, and visibility that are currently in my channel box. If I move to frame 120 and I change any of those values in any way, Maya is going to still remember that I gave it that instruction on frame 1. So if I move my mouse, it will just snap back to where I told it to. However, if I make a change to any of these values and hit S again, Maya will interpret that as a second command or a second piece of data about how I want this object to move. So if I were to just move this to the other end of my screen and hit S again, you'll see that now I have two commands. I have one for frame 1, where the object is all the way on the left side of my screen, and one on frame 120, where the object is all the way on the right side of my screen. Now we learned this in a previous class, so this isn't new information to you. However, what we're going to learn in this class is how to manipulate this keyframe data in order to craft our animation and be in complete control of it. So, if I hit play, my animation plays back really fast. Again, always double check for this, because when you're first getting started, you may forget how long 120 frames is. This should be 5 seconds long, but if I'm hitting play, it's playing it really fast. So I'm going to right click on my timeline and make sure my playback speed is set to real time. And so now when I hit play, this action of my cone moving from one side of the screen to the other is taking exactly 5 seconds. So what if that's too long? What if I want this action to happen really fast? If I wanted this action to happen in, say, 1 second, how could I make that happen? The answer is to shorten the number of frames in between my two keyframes. Currently, my first keyframe is on frame 1, my second is on frame 120, and that means it's taking 120 frames for this to happen. If I want that to happen faster, then I could tell Maya I want that action to happen in 10 frames or 20 frames. The way to do this is to change the location of this keyframe or this keyframe to make this distance in between shorter. So if I hold down Shift and click on my timeline, you'll see that I've highlighted that keyframe in red, and then I can click these arrows and drag that keyframe to a different point in my timeline. If I took it to frame 20, I can hit play, and now that motion happens really quickly. There's 100 frames afterwards where nothing happens, but the motion of my object moving from one side of the screen to the other is much faster. It's happening in less than a second, because currently my animation is playing back at 24 frames a second. I'm going to undo that and put my keyframe back on frame 120. Control Z a few times, and now my keyframe is back on frame 120. Now let's play with timing a little bit more. What if I wanted my object to stay in this location for, say, a second, and then I wanted it to anticipate backwards and shoot forward and then go past this location and come back to it? Like, that's a lot of extra information. But I am in complete control of that just by creating new keyframes. For example, if I want my object to stay in this location for longer, I just need another copy of this keyframe to happen later. So I will right click on here and say copy, and then I'll go out to, say, frame 30, and I'll right click and say paste. And you'll see that I have two options for paste. We'll talk about paste connect a little bit later. But right now, if I hit paste, my keyframe from frame 1 will be duplicated and pasted on frame 30. So now you'll see my animation stays in the same location for 30 frames and then starts to travel forward. But I don't want it to travel forward just yet. I want it to anticipate backwards, like a slingshot or an arrow. So for maybe 50 frames, I'm going to animate my object moving backwards instead of forward. And then I'll hit S again. Let me go ahead and zoom out a little bit so you can see this better. And so now we get that. Now, like an arrow taking off, if we get this anticipation backward, we kind of expect that to shoot forward a little faster, but it goes pretty slowly. Instead, I want this motion to happen in, again, less than a second, maybe 15 to 20 frames. So that means I want my object to reach the end destination by, say, frame 70. So I can copy frame 120 by right-clicking and saying copy, and then go back to frame 70, right-click, and hit paste, paste. So again, now I have a copy of frame 120 on frame 70. So if I hit play, anticipate back, shoot forward. Now I kind of want it to feel like it goes past this end destination and then kind of comes back to it. So that means I want it to be back at this location by, say, frame 80. So let's go ahead and hit S to put a marker in time on frame 80. But on frame 70, I'm going to take my arrow a little bit past that, and I'll hit S again to overwrite that change on my Translate X. And so now my animation looks like this. Again, this may not be exactly what I want, so I'll go back to the beginning, and let's say I wanted that motion to happen even faster. Well, I can make the distance in between these two keyframes shorter just by shortening that distance. So maybe I can grab frame 50, hold down Shift and click, and move that closer, say frame 55. And so now when I hit play, it's going to be a little faster. Keep in mind that we can shift whole sections of keyframes as well. Let's say I want all of these keyframes in the middle to happen just a little bit later. I can hold Shift and click drag on my timeline to highlight this whole region. Now I can slide this region of keyframes wherever I need to on my timeline. If I wanted to scale all of this to make it even faster, I can use one of these arrows on the end of the selected region to scale that in and make it even faster. Now it's important to remember that when we scale, Maya is going to scale this mathematically, and these numbers are not going to divide evenly into each other. So that means that now some of our keyframes are not on whole numbers. For instance, this keyframe here appears to be on frame 86, but it's actually on more like 86 and a half. And since I can't move my timeline to 86 and a half, I really need that keyframe to snap to frame 86. So I'll highlight that region again and right click and say snap. So now when I watch this animation, we have that. If I change my mind about all of this animation in the middle and decide I want to delete it, I can highlight all of these keyframes, right-click on the selected region, and say delete. Now I just have my starting and ending keyframe again for my arrow moving forward.